Hi, my name's Alex Brenner, and I'm the composer for MojoFilter Media. A few months ago, Orchestral Tools posted on their YouTube channel a question asking, what's your favorite Orchestral Tools sample library? And my comment was by far Berlin Brass. And I was surprised that not a lot of other people were commenting that. There was a lot of answers varying, ranging from Metropolis, Arc Series to Berlin Strings, Berlin Woodwinds, but not many people were saying Berlin Brass. And I was surprised by that because to me, it's such an invaluable tool that I use for writing basically all of my brass parts. I think it's very intricate library and there's a lot of little things. And I figured out a workflow that works for me so I can use all the articulations, having them mapped to different CC controllers, using a breath controller, arrangement tips, just different personalities of all the players. So for example, having horns 1, 2, 3, and 4 all sampled individually as separate players with separate instruments along with the unison patches, just to me adds so much character when you have 4 horns playing at the same time, playing different lines. Over the past year, I've been working with Berlin Brass and just the entire Berlin series almost exclusively, and I feel like I've really gotten a handle on them. So I want to make this video series to help show what I've learned and how I've managed to utilize all it has to offer. Well, not all of it, but a lot of it, and how you can do the same. My working list of video titles is this one, the intro in articulation mapping. So in this video, in the rest of it, I'm going to go through what CCs I have mapped to what parameters and how I'm controlling those and how they're used. Afterwards, I want to talk about articulations, using those for more musicality and having them set up in a way that's functional and not just constant legato all the time or just staccato or staccatissimo. Actually using the patches, how to crossfade in between articulations that their capsule system allows for. I want to talk about using a breath controller instead of a mod wheel or other fader for more realistic dynamic interpretation. I want to talk about mapping CC data and determining what's best for you, reprogramming pedals and how to do that behind the hood, and also just arrangement tips, creating more stereo width and interest across a stereo space with brass instruments. So I hope you'll join me for this series. I'm excited, and I think it'll help me reinforce some of the things I've learned over the past year, and I hope you get some value out of it. And even if you don't use Berlin Brass, I think there will be a lot here that you can apply to your own brass library that you use, even if it's not this one. I'm sure there's some commonalities. This is the only brass library I have, but I'm sure it would translate. Okay, so today I want to focus on a basic description and foundations of techniques and what's available to use in this library. So I'm going to go through what instruments are available, what patches are available, and articulations for each one, how I have that set up, what CC data I'm using, and what implements I'm using to manipulate that data. And just go through a basic setup. So clearly I'm in Logic Pro, and this is a small part of my template. This is my Berlin Brass area of the template. If I unhide all the tracks, there's a lot more. But this is all stuff that's just going to be confusing and that we don't need to see. So I basically have every patch loaded. I don't know if there's ones I'm missing. It's possible there's a few articulations. I might have filled up all the articulations. There might be some ones that I don't use much that I don't have loaded up. But this is the basics. So we have 4 individual French horns and the ensemble. So here's horn 1 legato, horn 1 multi, and horn 1 runs. And then we continue to the other instruments. The reason I have this set up is because in these 3 tracks per instrument is because they each, the way Berlin series divides it is there's a really cool adaptive legato system, which I'll show you, that is helpful to have in one track. The multi has all the other articulations that aren't legato. So, staccato, staccatissimo, triplets, 16th notes, crescendos, short crescendos, long crescendos, everything that is an articulation that you can make with a brass instrument that's not an extended technique is in this one. And then there's the runs, which is basically legato, but instead of using sustained long notes, it's short notes. So for example, let me get my breath controller. So you can see when I stop doing transitioning in between notes and I hold out a note, it's a sustained note. Whereas with the runs, so you can see that cuts off. So honestly, the uses of that specific one versus the other two are fairly limited. But it's still useful to have because I don't want to have to create a new track every time. So it's worth having in a template, even though it's not super used. And brass instruments are pretty standard. There's a standard set of articulations, and there's not that much different throughout the entire brass section. I have pretty much the same articulations mapped to the same key switches and controllers for every instrument. Instead of runs for the trombone, there's the gliss, where you go, where they slide. But that's really the only difference. So I'm going to show you how I have this set up. I use Logic, and all of these are actually going through Vienna Ensemble Pro. I do run all of these samples locally, so I'm not having VE Pro go out to another computer. But in the future, when I feel like this computer starts to get a little slow, I want to be able to have that as an option and not totally restructure my template. So I'm going to go over to that. So here it is. Here's my setup. And I have every mic position, not everyone, but the ones that I use, the close mic, the ORTF mics, the tree, and the ambient mic. I don't have the surround one mapped. I have them all mapped to different outputs. I only use the tree for 95% of stuff. Later on in the series, I'm going to go into other situations where these other ones can be useful. But the Berlin series was recorded all in the Tildex Hall. And if you use the same mic position for everything, you're going to get pretty close to a traditional orchestra recording using the tree mic, the Decca tree. So I just keep it. So you can see here that the trombone, it's just coming out this one. So let's use the horn, good instrument to use. And let's look at how this looks in Kontakt. So this is really why I have a division between these separate tracks. I would love for them all to be able to be on the same track. Maybe that's something I can do in the future. But there's a lot of different ways that I manipulate these things here that is better than just having a long patch with a legato attached to it here. I learned a lot of this stuff from the Orchestral Tools videos that they put out for Berlin Brass. They have great breakdowns on all these sections, really great examples, but I want to do my own series of videos and expand upon a little bit of what they said and give a practical application that I use. For example, they don't go into what controllers or, if they use a breath controller like this one to use CC data. I just want to break down what I do because I think that could be helpful. I really love their legato system. The transition length is determined by how fast you're playing. So I'll show you when I go through notes quickly, it has the runs legato automatically. And when I'm not going through, it's the slow legato. So you can see it adapts, what they call adaptive legato. So that's the primary parameter. And you can see they have it sampled in multiple velocity layers. So you can crossfade through those and it's very smooth. Another parameter that I just recently started using after going back through their videos and learning about it was the slur versus retongue legato. The way that they describe it in the video is that brass players, this is a direct quote, are very economical with their tonguing. So it might not be a best practice to just have a brass player slur everything. It's not just an expression marking, like putting it over a piano part. It's literal, right? If you have a slur mark over multiple bars, that's going to be weird because they need to breathe. If you have a legato section that's not slurred together, you're going to be using retongue. So it's a very light retongue, but it's a different sound, and I've been trying to utilize that more. And here's where I'm going to start getting into what CC input implements I'm using. So I don't have use for my piano's sustain pedal for sustaining notes here. I'm not interested in holding out chords or using it for that. I've literally never done that. So I'm going to use that for this. So I've mapped CC64, the sustain pedal, to this. So you can see when I put it down, it switches between slur and retongue. You can kind of hear the difference. So there's a little bit of a stop in between each note. It's very brief. It's just enough to put a little emphasis, creating a little bit more definition. So I use that interchangeably depending on how I feel the melody is flowing. And as I'll get into in the next video, a lot of how I determine that is through singing the lines or really breathing and trying to express as a brass player would through their breath. So you can program that here. In this section, I don't know what it's called, but it's a bunch of squares. And here you can go through all the different parameters, change all these. So I have this one, the retongue legato set to CC64. So you can see when I put that there, it goes. The other ones that are useful to know with this are CC1, which is mod wheel. And I use a breath controller for that. So that's, I use the TEC controller, bite and breath controller, and I just have that mapped so I can use the breath to control what I would have controlled with a mod wheel. So I just switched over to the trumpet to demonstrate one other parameter that the horn doesn't have that I want to show you. So that's vibrato. Right now it's set to without. And I have that mapped, the switch between without and with the romantic style vibrato, mapped to CC3, which to me is a bite controller. So on this, I have this, and I can just bite down, and you can see it switch between those. So that can add a lot of expression, and I change between those a lot depending on the function of the instrument. So let's stick with the trumpet since we're on it now. So in the multi, I have a variety of articulations set up, and you can read them here: staccato, staccatissimo, marcato short, marcato long, triplets, 16th notes, a short crescendo, a long crescendo, forte piano, a swell, a short swell, a long swell, and a trill, plus a half step. So I have these all, I use key switches, not a big fan of it, but you know, it's what I've got. So I have that map down here. So and that's all, those are all, the staccato and staccatissimo are based on velocity, how hard you hit it, but the marcato and marcato long are based on mod wheel. The main CC I use on this is CC22, and you could program it to whatever you want. I end up drawing this in usually. I might map it to a different pedal or something. But what it allows you to do is crossfade in between articulations. So, for example, if I press 2 key switches at once, let's say I want a forte piano going into a crescendo. So there's that, and then that. So if I press both at the same time, I can crossfade between these two using CC22. And I'll show that in a different video. But that's so useful. I use this function all the time, and I honestly don't know what I would do without it, because I use this specific transition of articulations all the time, especially in like big battle music where you want a big hit and then pull back and allow for other elements of the music to come forward and then for the brass to come back in for a big crescendo. So if a library, I think this is a really efficient way that they did this, because they didn't have to go record all these extra unnecessary articulations. You can just crossfade them on the fly, whether you want to go from a crescendo, a swell into a crescendo, or 16th notes into a trill. You can do that, and it might require some tweaking to get it to sound right, but you can do it. And that's what I appreciate. There's some things in this library that still take me a little while, but I can do it. And that's what I think matters the most to me. The only other CC I really use here, and this is also a new one for me, is for the triplets and the 16th notes. This is another one I draw in because I don't use it very often. I usually have it set to a pretty standard subdivision. But in here, you can have the tempo scaling. In fast-paced music, I might need to adjust this to make sure I'm getting the right number of notes per beat. Moving on to the playable runs, that's really, I don't have anything set. It's just the breath controller for CC1. That's it. I know I didn't show a lot of the articulations. I didn't play them for you. But there's a lot of people out there who have already done that. They've shown what the articulations sound like. They've demonstrated them. And I don't think there's any point for me really to go over that. What I want to do is find a practical way to show you how to use them. So next video, I'm going to talk about how we can use as many of those articulations as possible to most effectively convey a musical message. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. And I really hope this has been useful. Thank you.